I landed in Rome on a sunny winter day. It's been a while since I've been here, since I've been home. The pandemic had made trips complicated, let alone those from one country to another. But the sanitary crisis seemed to have calmed down for a bit, and I have a few days of vacation left before my studies and work resumed. So I decided to go back to my parents' house and spend a week with my family. The flight was a bit tiring, so after the 30-minute drive home, the obligatory catching up to do with my parents, and the unpacking of my stuff, I figured that it's a good moment to just relax to play some PS3 games. As I dig through my catalog of games, I find a dusty copy of Watch Dogs that I hadn't played in years. Overshadowed by its older brother GTA 5 that was far more fun to play, the game rarely left the shelf, to the point that I had never completed the game's campaign. But on this day, something compelled me to choose it rather than another game, and that something was a song on the game's soundtrack, and that song was Funeral Singers by Califone.
Funeral singers will charity fails. Whose child are you now?
In the past, I had never bothered to search for the song, nor tried to get to know the band better. For 7 years, it was just that cool song that would play on the radio of the car I stole from a dude in Watch Dogs. Despite the fact that I remember really liking this song. So I decided to see if it still held up after all those years. And wouldn't you know it, it was even better than before. The song breathed this tender air of nostalgia, giving me a bittersweet feeling like I had rarely felt before. But maybe I was a bit too biased towards this song after all. I had just come back to the house in which I grew up after years abroad, listening to a song that I hadn't heard in an eternity. So of course I would have a burst of memories that would cause this nostalgic feeling in me. Still, Califone had caught my interest, and I was finally ready to take a deeper look into the band. When you search up Califone on Google, the first thing that will pop up besides the band's website is a plethora of eBay adverts offering you musical tech, headsets, tape recorders, radios, you name it. This isn't surprising though. Tim Rutilli, who is at the origin of the band, named it after the audio equipment company Califone. This homage already sets a certain tone that once again falls in line with the sentiment of nostalgia, a love for the past, even if it can sometimes lead to rupture with today's music industry. Rutilli often mentions in interviews how he struggles with the dematerialization of music, a struggle that stems from his love for the physical aspect of the medium. It's hard to talk about the subject without sounding like an old man that prefers the way things were the old pre-internet days. I grew up obsessed with records, the sound, the cover art, and the liner notes.
And I've always thought of making records as we're creating an object. You know, it is an object, and the artwork is a big part of it. Opening up and holding it is a big part of it. Reading the inside and looking at the pictures, it's all part of it.
Califone started as a small home project in 1997 that grew in importance through the years. Rutilli wanted to create an easily accessible songs that would feature a mix of pop and blues, giving them this soothing and nostalgic sound that is especially present but not only in The Orchids, Michigan Girls, and the often mentioned Funeral Singers. Lyric-wise, Funeral Singers resonated with my present situation, and this returned to the roots. When asked about the meaning behind the lyrics of his songs, Rutilli explains that, for me, there's a lot. I don't expect there to be any for a listener unless they're inserting their own. A lot of them seem not necessarily narrative, but like an inner dialogue. It's odd how quickly past habits come back. I feel like I'm back in my teenage years, playing the same games, calling the same friends to hang out at the same places, listening to the same music. It feels like a bubble floating outside of this world, and it is so mesmerizing that I forget that it can pop at any given moment. My parents are moving out of this house this summer and selling it. I can barely begin to realize that this is a part of my life that will be gone in a few months. So I try to enjoy it while it lasts, filling my room with the tunes of Pearl Jam or Green River. It's funny how the sound of Red Red Meat, the band that Tim Rutilli was part of before creating Califone, would have been right up my alley during my high school days. With its grungy energy that was so popular on the alternative rock scene in the 90s, Red Red Meat had known its fair share of success, being the first Chicago band signing up with the label Sub Pop that to this day describes their album Bunny Gets Paid as one of the high points of their catalog. Similarly to Califone, Red Red Meat's goal was to create a link between roots and modernity, which made it stand out from other bands at the time, as Piero Scaruffi explains in his work on the band. Among the Chicago bands, they were already an anomaly, as they attempted an unlikely bridge between the modern grunge and the ancestral blues of those parts. However, after listening to their first album, self-titled Red Red Meat, I would have never imagined that the same artist would later be behind the tracks created by Califone. The songs on this album often have an overwhelming grungy tone that drowns the more bluesy side in distorted chords, leaving only the latter part of the album with songs like Rubbing Mirror or Sandbox to represent what the band would gradually evolve into. Califone's work, in contrast, tends to sound smoother and more organic. Let me explain. Family has a dog, so when the weather isn't too bad, I take it on walks. We're lucky enough to live next to a forest, which gives our pup plenty of space to play and run around. That's when it hit me. Califone's music sounds like a stroll in the forest. From an instrumental point of view, especially when it comes to the guitar, it sounds like someone playing on a piece of wood with a few strings attached to it, but like in the best way possible. The instrument in itself is put so much at the forefront in these tracks that one can hear through them what material the instrument is made of. There's also the particular attention that is given to sounds and noises. When I walk in a forest, I can hear the dead leaves rustle beneath my feet. The branches shake as crows land on them and start cawing. The river endlessly rushing down. Califone achieves a similar experience by adding sounds and ambient noise, as Gabriel Benzing explains in his article when talking about Roots and Crowns. Songs born from melodies hummed at the wheel and captured by a mobile phone recorder, suggested by conversations overheard by chance, built on disordered collections of loops and field recordings, innovated by throbs and rustles found within the walls of the studio. We took our time to shape and manipulate a more experimental collage of sounds and translate it into solid melodies and more concise song structures, said Rutilli. Furthermore, some of the songs were recorded in a warehouse in Long Beach, giving the drums a unique sound and adding even more flavors to those pieces. I'm on my way to meet a group of friends that I haven't seen in a while. We used to organize a yearly soccer match with the guys from school. However, the number of people coming would decrease every year, and we ended up having barely enough people to even form one team. I don't know if there are still some of my old classmates who are organizing these games, as I have only kept in touch with a few of them. And by kept in touch, what I really mean was the occasional small talk and maybe a happy birthday if Facebook reminded me of it. So there was a little bit of fear that lingered in my mind. Fear that when we'd meet up, it wouldn't be like it used to, that it would be awkward. But I was wrong. Surprisingly, as much as our lives had changed on an individual level, the bond between us stood up the passage of time. We had a good time reminiscing about dumb stories of the past, saying, "Yeah, I remember that," and adding little details to them to have a more complete image of these comedic tales. Those close ties are important, and they may also be part of the reasons why the creation of Califone felt more like a natural transition from Red Red Meat than the band simply breaking up. While originally intended to be a solo project by Tim Rutilli, Califone ended up featuring many other artists, amongst whom past members of Red Red Meat. With the same people at the head of Califone than Red Red Meat, what Rutilli offered in his new project wasn't too big of a departure from the music he had previously done, and enabled him to appeal to a broader audience while also keeping the interest of longtime fans. Rutilli himself was impressed by the audience's response, expecting some more backlash because of the more pop-oriented direction in this project's first album, Room Sound. People sort of just took it as a continuation of what we were already doing. What we thought we were doing was drastically different, but people didn't seem to think so. It was the same people on that record, and I suppose looking back, it was just a continuation of what we were doing. The intent, though, has always been to make music we wanted to hear. Room Sound wasn't the only album that marked a turning point in Rutilli's musical journey. Before it, there was the 1993 album Jimmy Wine Majestic. If Red Red Meat tended to be shy about its bluesy aspects, Jimmy Wine Majestic unapologetically takes on the blues, putting it on equal footing with the grungier side of the band that used to be predominant in the first album. Room Sound and Jimmy Wine Majestic are two albums that share many similarities. Both stand out as more experimental, with tracks offering new paths for the band to explore. Both would serve as grounds for a more successful successor, Jimmy Wine Majestic for Good Bunny Gets Paid and Room Side for Quicksands and Rattlesnakes. And more importantly, both would come to at a difficult moment in Rutilli's life. In 1992, Glynis Johnson, bassist of the Red Red Meat, died from AIDS. But to Tim Rutilli, she was more than a fellow band member or a friend. The two of them had been in a romantic relationship before breaking up and Glynis Johnson leaving the band a few months prior to her death. While it is safe to assume that the band would have shifted to a more bluesy style regardless of this tragic event, Johnson's death pushed the band to fully embrace this side of their music with Jimmy Wine Majestic. When talking about the album Room Sound, Rutilli revealed that his work was like a coping mechanism, helping him to get through tough times. I had just got divorced. I was living alone for the first time in my life, and I had stopped drinking. Completing this record was like a kind of therapy. Loss is something that lingers on your heart and weighs it down. I lost my grandfather last year. It was the first major loss I have ever experienced, and the thought of it still haunts me. But I could talk about it with this group of friends, and it felt relieving. It wasn't any grand breakdown with tears rushing down like waterfalls. Just a few words about how sad it was, and a bit of sympathy from my friends. Today was a good day. My last day down memory lane has finally come. My plane will be leaving at 10:30 in the morning, so I had to wake up at 8, when the first rays of sun start to appear and the thin fog floating on the forest hasn't yet disappeared. This feels so surreal, maybe because of this beautiful scenery, or because my mind was still hazy from waking up early, but I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that this might be the last time I see this house. But despite this feeling of no return, I was still able to enjoy each and every day of this short stay without losing myself in a state of melancholy. This shows that things change, and it's alright as long as you keep the best parts of them in your memory. A mentality that is reflected in Rutili's works. Califone's duality between its attachment to musical American roots and the dreamlike style that it brings to the table is certainly part of its charm. But the balance present between those two elements was an endeavor that took a decade to achieve and started with the creation of Red Red Meat and continued up until now. This evolutionary process is present all the way down to the album cover arts. Quicksand and Cradle Snakes with its stored-down photo of what seems to be a prom night is nostalgia incarnate. Heron King's Blues portrays the Heron King, inspired by Celtic mythology, as a creature blurring the boundary between dreams and reality. All My Friends Are Funeral Singers, unlike prior albums, manages to blend both of those themes into one image with its mishmash of drawings of mythical creatures and mundane things like an ink stain or the photo of a dog. The album art reminds me of a notebook I used to have during my teenage years, full of scribbles, drawings and photos. I am even pretty sure that I had a pretty similar photo than the one on the upper middle part of the album, but with my dog on it instead. In essence, that is what Califone is to me. Scraps of the past seen through a new and more mature pair of eyes. Tomorrow I'll go back to my daily and frenetic routine, rushing between work and studies. But at least I'll have Califone. At least I'll have music that sounds like a soft winter break.